Today I'm making a really simple sofa table with mortise and tenon joinery. The end result should be a really strong table that's very inexpensive. I've laid out all of my parts to be cut out of these 4 boards. These are 4 8-foot long 2x10 boards, and each one ran about $8 locally. So this whole table should cost in wood materials about $32, and if you take into consideration glue and finish, less than $40 for the entire table. I'm going to start by rough cutting and then milling all of the pieces for the legs. Each individual leg is 2.5 inches square, and each one of these boards is 1.5 inches thick. So each leg will be made up of 2 pieces glued together. Now I don't have that many clamps, so I need to go ahead and get these into clamps first. That way I can be productive while the glue is drying. I've taken the time to group my leg pieces so that the outside 2 faces of each leg will show the best grain orientation. And in order to do this, I made sure also to select wood that has about a 45-degree angle or thereabouts on all of the pieces. That way this front face will show straight grain lines and this side face will show straight grain lines. These are 2 boards, so the side that has the glue line will always be on the side. The front doesn't have any glue lines on any of these. Now, in order to make sure that they stay in this appropriate orientation throughout the rest of the project, I've numbered them 1 and 2 for the first leg, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so that the numbers, as long as they're right side up, they will be in the same orientation with one another. And then also this represents the front left leg, the rear left leg, front right leg, rear right leg, so that way I don't get this confused or mixed up throughout the rest of the process, and I know that the final outcome will have the grain that I selected on the faces that I want it to be shown. The final width of my top panel is going to be wider than the capacity of my planer, so I went ahead and milled all 4 of the pieces that will make up the top panel square 4 sides. And to make sure that they remain nice and flat during glue up and don't shift around any, I'm going to use floating tenons. In the interest of eliminating some of the repetition for the milling process, I went ahead and got the legs down to their final size, milled 4 sides square, and I also did the exact same thing for the short rails and long rails. All of these are milled 4 sides square to their appropriate thickness and length, including the length needed for the tenons, the short rails and the long rails. And I also ran a couple pieces of test boards, or extra scrap I should say, through the planer when I was milling my rails, and this will give me an exact same thickness piece that I could use to set up the table saw for cutting the tenons on the rails. First though, I'm going to go ahead and cut all 8 of the mortises on the legs. I went ahead and marked the start and stop point for the mortises on the face of the leg, and that's all I need to mark out here because I know that the guide that I'm going to use to run the router will reference off of both sides, so that will keep it tracking in order. Now these are offset mortises, so I don't get confused. I went ahead and marked the side in which the offset will be on for each one of these faces that will receive a mortise. And to actually position the mortise, it is an offset mortise, so we're going to come in from the side 1/4 of an inch. This material thickness is 1 1/4 of an inch, and it's going to have a 1/2 inch tenon in the middle. So 1/2 inch tenon means 3/8 of an inch on either side. So the 1/4 inch plus the 3/8 of an inch before I get to the tenon tells me that I need to offset the base or the guide on my router jig 5/8 of an inch from one side, and the 1/2 inch router bit will cut a 1/2 inch mortise right where this tenon will be. Setting up the guide on the jig is really easy. This side is slightly tightened down so it'll pivot and then just measure over that 5/8 of an inch that I need, and then tighten down this side. That gives me the first guide exactly 5/8 of an inch away from the bit, which is what I need for this mortise. With the first guide set, I can actually go ahead and start the mortises if I want to, referencing off of just one side, but I want to prevent the jig from moving forward and backwards in this direction. So I'm going to slide the second guide into place and tighten it down. Now the router will slide left and right as needed, and all I have to do is plunge the mortise. When using a plunge router to make mortises, it's best to plunge full depth at the start point and then plunge full depth at the end point of the mortise, and then take shallow passes to remove the material in between. There's several different ways to cut tenons on material, but I'm going to use the dado stack in my table saw. It's just quick and easy for me. So that same test piece that I milled earlier with my rails, I'm using it because it is the exact same thickness to really dial in the height of the blade. I have the outside of the blade positioned away from the fence about a 1/16 of an inch less than the depth of my mortise, and after a couple passes on one side, flipping the board over and making a couple passes on this side, the test fit should be snug but not too tight. This is holding the leg up against gravity, yet very easy to pull out as needed. And something else I've done is added a sacrificial board to my miter gauge, as well as one that is in line with the dado blade. I just screwed these two together to where the blade won't hit it, and this acts as a dust shroud. As I'm pushing this piece through the blade is fully enclosed inside this, which is a safety benefit, which I don't think is really necessary, but the main thing I'm doing this for is to keep a shroud, basically to force all of that dust into the table instead of flying back into my workshop. The tenons are square, the mortises are round, so I'm going to knock off the corner by undercutting, which I've already done to the tenon on one side. I only have to do this to one side because I made my mortises a little bit long, and then I'll just chop off the corner with a chisel. And that should fit in there. The dry assembly is nice and all the joints are fitting good, so now I can take it back apart and cut a taper on the inside two faces of each leg, and then also cut a groove near the top inside of all the rails to accept some tabletop hold down fasteners. I normally make my tapered cuts at the table saw, however the thickness of my legs plus the thickness of my tapering jig base is more than the maximum cut capacity of my table saw. So this time I'm using my bandsaw, and then I'll clean up those rough faces that the bandsaw will leave with the jointer.
And that's all, folks.